Thank you for joining us today, everyone. We're really looking forward to having this conversation with you. We're excited to introduce the panelists who've joined us today. Just a few housekeeping things. All audience participants will be muted. Please use the toolbar to submit your questions for the Q&A, and we'll provide you contact coordinates for each of the panelists near the end of the webinar. And the recording will be made available. Just give us a couple of days to get that to your inbox. So before I introduce the panelists, let me introduce the scope of today's discussion. So as everyone is fully aware that market fundamentals have permanently shifted. Energy transition, renewables, and other green projects are now permanent fixtures of the landscape of every market. Sustainability objectives are top of mind for executive leadership all day, every day. And whether they realize it or not, the C-suite's ability to materially demonstrate and deliver and report on the impact of sustainability objectives has a critical dependency on the asset management system. Asset management practitioners have had the opportunity to be invited into the boardroom and earn a permanent seat at the table in the same way other management systems like environment, safety, quality have in recent decades. However, the marketplace is teeming with vendors promoting their digital solutions, all of which claim some type of revolutionary capability enabled by artificial intelligence. This can divert executive and organizational attention away from existing processes and organizational capabilities that are already in place and working well. And as such, the asset management community has experienced how the C-suite fails to fully appreciate the results and outcomes produced by an organization's asset management system. So this discussion of the value chain approach makes an important assertion. It's that the asset management community has been preparing for this. Standards have been developed and communities of practice have been in place for years. The focus on sustainability means it's time for asset management thinking to permeate the boardroom. And so it's my great pleasure today to introduce our panelists on this webinar. These are people who have been direct participants and change agents in these very areas of discussion, and the thoughts that they share with us today will enable this important discussion within your own organizations. And so Tom Smith, being our first panelist, he's an author, lecturer, advisor on asset management, and is credited with conceptualizing the value chain model for asset management. He's the current vice president of the US chapter of the Institute of Asset Management, member of the ANSI National Accreditation Board, and US delegate to ISO TC 251. Susan Lubell is principal consultant at STEP Consulting. She brings over 25 years of progressive leadership experience to implement asset management business decisions and improvement opportunities in asset-intensive energy production companies. Also, I encourage you to click on that QR code because Sue is the recent recipient of the PEMAC Asset Management Leadership Award. So click on that QR code for a video about Susan that this presentation doesn't do justice to. And so we have, finally, we have Rob Arsenault, our third panelist. He's a trusted maintenance and reliability professional providing standardized and current best practice approach through people, process, technology, and reliability culture. He has the ability to align corporate vision to asset management and enable continuous improvement, reliability, cost reduction, and asset value realization. Chairing this panel will be our very own Rachel Wagner, whose 17 years at GE includes aerospace, power, and digital, where she served 9 years in supply chain, 2 years in aviation, supporting global airlines, 6.5 years at Power Digital in the asset performance management space. And she'll be driving the conversation today, which promises to be the most enriching dialogue on this subject so far this year. Before I hand it off to Rachel, let me briefly describe the value chain model. Near the footings at the bottom of the model of the asset value chain is where the transactional work gets done. This is typically the domain of the CMMS and EAM, and it's commonly used to enable that environment. Focuses on managing individual assets. As you move up the value chain further up the pyramid or triangle. The focus is on systems and networks of assets. And then the scope is increasingly there on asset opportunity, risk, cost, and performance. And this is typically where you find the APM work processes, where they exist. And then as you move further up the value chain, the focus is on regulatory compliance, return on investment, and sustainability goals, typically where asset investment planning takes place. And then finally, this links to the top of the model directly to the needs and expectations of internal and external stakeholders. And so this is where I hand it off to our panel chair, Rachel Wagner, and to bring our panelists into the discussion. Take it away, Rachel.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mark, for that warm introduction and handoff. I'm absolutely honored and thrilled to be moderating this discussion today with these panelists. So we will kick things off by having Tom first talk us through the top level of this pyramid and describe some of the challenges that C-suite stakeholders are thinking about all day, every day, and describe what he sees as, the importance of investment grade data as a single source of truth. I will then invite our panelists, Sue and Rob, to give us a little dose of reality and talk us through the middle and foundational layers of this value chain. They will be sharing how asset management professionals and maintenance and reliability teams can take these top floor objectives and turn them into practical and tangible actions. So that is the intent of this webinar today, and I'm excited to kick things off. So without further ado, Tom, take it away and talk to us about this mega trend we call sustainability.
All right, thanks very much. The diagram that Mark just presented is actually a pyramid that comes out of the old original PAS 55 work, and I simplified that and added a little bit to it, but I'd like to take credit for the whole thing, but I can't. One of the things I'd like to start with is when I talk about value chain in general, I refer to the work by Michael Porter, which I think is pretty well known in the most financial and management communities. Michael Porter's value chain ends with customer value, and the whole purpose of the value chain analysis is building competitive advantage. And that's really what I want to talk about today is the competitive advantage of understanding your organization, understanding how it works, and understanding how it creates value, and the role of asset management in helping the executive level to achieve that understanding. I think on the top of that value chain that we just saw, the top of that pyramid, there's a little there's a little circle called, or a little arrow called keeping stakeholders happy. What we're talking about today is keeping up with stakeholders, if possible, getting ahead of them. If you wait for stakeholders to be unhappy and to let you know how unhappy they are and why they're unhappy, you're out of luck. This whole issue, I think, for the C-suite is getting ahead of stakeholder unhappiness. And today, with the churn and the issues around the impacts and the issues around sustainability, getting ahead of the game is very difficult. And it's going to require the whole organization pulling together. And again, I think that's where asset managers, and those involved have a huge contribution to make. So the next slide has I have two slides with a fair bit of detail. I'm going to go through it quickly, but I'm very happy to add any detail that somebody wants in a question or to send out links and references. We're going to talk a little bit about reporting requirements, and I'll tell you first that this is absolute alphabet soup. Those reporting requirements have changed every other month for the last 10 years, and every time they change, the organizations involved split or merge, the acronyms change, and it's a serious job to keep up with all this. But I think we can make sense of it. If you want to know more, please let us know, and I can follow through with that. The top line is really the thesis. Asset management can provide the understanding necessary, and I want to talk a little bit about what does that actually mean, and where are these requirements coming from. So what's now in place as of January 2024 is corporate sustainability requirements, reporting requirements in Europe. And those requirements apply to any organization with more than 40 million euros in turnover, or 250 employees. So that's, and it also apply to organizations doing business in Europe. So it's a pretty broad scope right now, and it's going to become more broad. The law recently passed and signed in California is built more or less on the European model. Both of those go back to something which is called the 6 capitals as the foundation for thinking, understanding, and reporting. It looks like if the SEC is hung up on scope 3, which is the reporting greenhouse gas across the whole value chain, and there's obviously a lot of political turmoil around scope 3 in the US, but scope 3 is part of California, is part of Europe, and we'll see what happens with the SEC, but it's pretty likely that if SEC doesn't do anything, New York will follow California. So we're going to have 2 of the largest economies with significant reporting requirements no matter what else happens. The initial requirements are all climate focused, but there's a little bit of social impact reporting in the European one, and it's going to come along in stages. There are about 4 or 5 annual stages announced, and each time there will be more reporting on social impact and economic impact. So this is just the beginning, but it's already looking pretty significant. It would be a real mistake, I think, for me or anyone to claim that reporting is going to drive behavior. We have these reporting requirements as a reflection of stakeholder pressures, and it's the stakeholder pressures that are driving behavior. The reporting requirements are really just a tip of an iceberg. They're an indicator of what's going on. And in that sense, they really do, if you read them and look at what's being asked, they really do consolidate a lot of stakeholder requests, stakeholder thinking, and they're worth paying attention to whether you're forced to report or not, because as I say, they consolidate what is being looked at and asked for. There are a couple of recent surveys, one by Accenture and the UN, another by the World Economic Forum, both of which show that the sustainability is at the very top, as Mark said, at the very top of C-suite concerns. And it's because of those stakeholder concerns. So when I talk about stakeholders, I think, it's important to realize that it's not just the financial side of it. I mean, your stakeholders are your customers, your employees, your suppliers, your partners in industry, the people who work for you, like your accountants and your consultants. Stakeholders are, and the general public. I mean, you have a wide variety of stakeholders, and they are invested with both feet in the sustainability thing. So that's what drives it, and that's what we're paying attention to. Next slide. So what does asset management have to do with all this? If you look at the requirements, as I said, it's worth reading. There are 2 things that stand out. Now, these requirements are all coming initially out of the accounting community. The 6 capitals that I mentioned go back to 2010, and they are a product of the International Society of Accountants, and a really powerful collection of thinking from accounting executives, accounting managers. And the attempt for the 6 capitals was to look at issues other than money in terms of how you describe what a capital actually is. We can go into that later if somebody wants to, but I think it's very important reading. I'll provide a reference. The key requirement when you look at the reporting requirements are materiality and investment grade data. Materiality, and I'm just going to read a short definition of materiality, and because most of you are not accountants, and neither am I, but I've been forced to read a bunch of this stuff. Material information, if omitted, misstated, or not disclosed, then the information has the potential to affect the economic decisions of users of the financial report or the discharge of accountability by management or those charged with governance. So materiality is what makes a difference and what's critical. And we put materiality in first because the next issue is data. And there are 2 ways to look at data. One is top down, what do we need to do? What do we need to know to make good decisions? The other is bottom up, which is let's collect everything and see what we learn. Unfortunately, in any decent sized organization, collecting everything and throwing it into the hopper is only going to generate confusion. So the 2 go together in the sense you really need to know what your decisions are going to be and how and why you're going to make them and when, and then you need the data to support that. When I first heard the term investment grade data, it was on a panel sponsored by the folks that wrote the European standard, and what I thought of it was what we've always called in asset management one source of truth. Where is that place where all the data comes together that you can actually rely on to make decisions, to understand how things operate and make decisions? In most of what's going on previously in reporting, particularly in the areas of greenhouse gas and so forth, it's been a matter of looking at purchase, how much fuel did we purchase and how did we use it? And how did we use it is very often just either an industry aggregate or a company aggregate, but it's average data applied to a purchase. We've got to get way beyond that in order to understand how the organization works. And even within an industry, we have to get beyond average data. I was talking a couple of days ago with a good friend who's a maintenance principal for a huge pharmaceutical. So they've got 70 plants around the world, lots of databases, lots of management systems. And he said, look, we can take an average, but look at the deviation around that average from plant to plant, line to line, even when the equipment is similar. You really have to understand how the business works and understand how the plants work in order to be able to understand what your impact you're having. And those requirements are going to become more and more onerous, I think. And really the opportunity for asset management to support these requirements is really, I think where we're at today is asset management can make a direct, immediate, and long-term contribution here to the understanding and the reporting. Mark started out with a seat at the table. I think that it's more than a seat at the table. It's a direct involvement, a change in thinking, a direct involvement in the thinking of the organization. One of my Australian colleagues likes to talk about the asset management lens, looking at the organization through the lens of its assets. That's another pretty good way. That's a pretty good metaphor, I think. That's kind of where I'd like to leave this is if you can help your management see it through an asset management lens and build some detail in that, credible detail in that, that's a golden opportunity.
Yeah. Tom, oh man, you hit the nail on the head. I absolutely agree with you. And I definitely want to get Sue and Rob's perspective on that asset management lens, where they see practical, tangible actions that can be taken by asset management professionals in, getting the seat at the table, getting a voice in the room of the boardroom. So we'll definitely get to that. But thank you for painting that vivid picture of these challenges that and market pressures that corporate executives are facing, every single day, and commenting on some ways that we can contribute to make those stakeholders happy. So,
yeah, I would add one more thing. I was talking with a group of what I think we used to call young asset management professionals or something like that within one of the organizations. And I think I ended with, be careful what you wish for. Because in this case, if you wish for the C-suite to pay attention to you, they just might.
Oh, it's so true. All right, well, let's transition over. Let's give Sue a chance to tell us about her perspective on this asset value chain model that has been presented. And Sue, give us your thoughts on what asset management professionals should be doing more or less of to, keep those stakeholders happy and tune into what they're thinking about.
I'd like to thank Tom for kicking it off. It's always hard to be the first person up. One of the things when both Mark and Rachel came to me and said, hey, you know what, we want to do this webinar looking at value chain models for asset management. We have this model, which is certainly well known and seen for many years in industry. And how does this translate into things that we can do inside of our own organizations? And I love how Tom has talked about sustainability and brought up a lot of the materiality and reporting and things like that. From myself, what I really think resonates with me with this concept, I love asset management lens, because to me, asset management, the best definition I've got is it's the coordinated efforts of the organization to deliver value from the assets. So it's not the book value of those assets. It's how all of us collaborate and work together to deliver value from the assets. When we start to get into how we're going to report, all those sorts of things, if we think of asset management from a business perspective, right, I always thought of it as sheer safety, health, environment, economics, and our regulatory compliance. And the economics includes production. And it's really, we've seen more of this extension recently to ESG. So we already had the environment there, but that's social and governance, which includes all of our concerns around climate, around sustainability and things like that. So what I've really seen here is that those are really those overall, if we drop from the corporate organizational management into the asset management portfolio, what lens do we look at it through? And I like to think of it that way. We certainly want to consider safety, health, and the environment. There's no doubt about that. And it's not just our employees on site, it's the public at large. And then we need to move into our economics or our delivery of whatever our product is. And we start to use that to drive our business decisions within this asset management portfolio. I think we've all been in companies or organizations where it's really hard to connect the dots between lofty goals set out at the top levels of the organization. And what does that mean as we move down with that integration and alignment from the C-suite to our VP or senior management, into our frontline management, and into our frontline workers? And I think that what we're really seeing here is sort of as you move up the value chain and add value, we need to bring in this balance of cost, risk, and performance. We need to consider this from the perspective of what are we delivering for performance in our for-profit organizations. Often it's about meeting what guidance we've given to the market in terms of our production volumes, that sort of thing. If we're in a government, say a municipality, for example, it's about delivering the lines of service that we have committed to our citizens. How do we do this? Well, managing and spending costs and spending taxpayer dollars wisely, or spending costs on the right thing, while bringing our risk mitigation down to something that we can manage. We're never going to get rid of all risk, but how do we find this sweet spot on the manageability? So to me, what we're taking is the lofty goals at the top, translate them down through our asset management portfolio in our decision making, and then ask ourselves, what does this mean for delivering value with that balance of cost, risk, and performance? There's a lot of great examples out there of how we drop down through this pyramid and start to build up where we're going with it. I think when we start to get into the data indicators that Tom is talking about, one of the big things is we need to be able to use our data indicators to show whether these are key performance indicators up at our C-suite level or performance indicators within each of our teams. How are we contributing to meeting the overall organizational goals and objectives, which by extension include the sustainability that we're looking for our outside stakeholders? I'm just conscious of the time here. I don't want to take it all up. I'm going to turn it over to Rob to share his thoughts, because I'm sure we're going to have a lively discussion here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sue. I appreciate it. That was outstanding. Certainly moving down the pyramid, Rob, you've spent a number of years working at the footings of this with maintenance and reliability organizations, and I'm sure have some thoughts on corporate culture and corporate mindsets that, quite frankly, haven't worked and need to shift in order to contribute to these top level objectives. So give us your thoughts, please. Oh, you're on mute, Rob. Let's see if I can unmute you.
Yep. Got it?
There you go. Yep.
All right. So thanks so much, Rachel and Tom and Sue, for leading us off. I have a lot of perspective with respect to asset management, and I'd like to speak about it a little bit with respect to the lens that everybody's talking about. And the reality is we don't have one lens, right? The doers have a lens. The middle management have a lens. The leadership and EC suites have a lens. And if you put a bunch of lenses together, you kind of build yourself a telescope. And as kids, we've all looked through the telescope. And if you look at it from one direction, things become closer and clearer and bring a lot of context. And if you look at it through the other direction, things become distant, blurry, and they just don't make any sense. So those lenses become critical. And the fact of the matter is, every company in the world that has manufacturing is managing their assets. They're managing them to whatever level that they deem necessary, and or through ignorance, just do it. So, you could do nothing as a management style, but that's managing them. Doing lots with the wrong things is a style. Doing lots of the right things is a style, right? And the reality is, we need to have a conversation around these lenses with respect to what are the drivers. I've spent 35 plus years pushing these concepts. And the reality is we need to get into the leadership and create the pull. And that's the paradigm shift. Once the leaders start pulling, then they will pull the right work, ask the right questions. Now, I don't expect my leaders to be experts in asset management. I don't think they're experts in safety. I don't think they're experts in diversity. I don't think they're experts in finance. They have those people. But the reality is they know enough about it to ask the right questions and build the right goals. And so I think that we need to build that lens and get in there and help them build that vision, so we're all looking through the telescope in the same direction. Because once you get in that right lens and that right focal point, things become much easier. And why I say it becomes easier is because I've spent 40 years or 30 some years as what I would call CEO role. And people will say, well, you're not the CEO. I said, no, I'm the chief explanation officer. I spend more time building business cases and selling these simple and fundamental concepts within maintenance and reliability to do the right work. So if I've spent 80% of my time trying to sell it, 20% of my time doing, you're not really going to get into the right success. So if we can all agree that there's multiple lenses and based on how you configure them, you can get a different view. How do we create that pull from the top? Well, we can educate our leaders in asset management fundamentals. We don't need them to be experts. They know environment, safety, and regulatory and diversity and finance. But when we get our leaders to truly understand the asset management, we start to drive to the right work, right? And when M&R is one of the things in that education is M&R a cost? This is the big debate across all LinkedIn is cost. It's a cost center, which is a misnomer within your ERPs. If you consider yourself a cost center or your leadership considers yourself a cost center, that's a cultural way we need to change. If you look at your maintenance and reliability with respect to how you invest your money for retirement, you don't consider that a cost, you consider that an investment. You don't give somebody $10 and expect 8 back, you expect 12 back, right? And maintenance and reliability, and all our experts on the panel know that if I spend $100 on an asset, I shouldn't be losing money by doing that. It should be an investment. Now, these investments, like in the real world, are long-term. We do not do maintenance and reliability and expect everything's to turn around in 6 months. It's going to go up, it's going to go down. The reality is that doing this work from the top is an understanding that when I go do PMs, strategies, condition monitoring, I'm essentially looking for things to fix. And then there's a bow wave of cost. Most companies pull out of that program saying, oh, it costs us too much. So let's pull out of it at year 3. And knowing that in year 5, we start reaping the benefits of this. So this is becoming where we need to get to on how we can create the pull. And we need to link these work thought processes to the things that our leaders understand. Now, I know Tom and I talked a little bit about should the leaders be driving this concept down with some more deeper knowledge. And I don't think it's deeper. I think there's some fundamental stuff. But the reality is leaders are not, they're not the people that we think we are. I mean, I work with a company that's 16,000 employees and say, oh, does any of our leaders know what they're doing? They all must be low IQ, or they just don't know what they're doing. I said, well, the reality is we have to stop assuming that our leaderships are not smart. They're highly intelligent. They're highly driven. But what we don't know is what their goals are. We don't know what motivates them to do that. So one thing we have to do to get to this from the top down and get the support from a pull perspective is understand their personal goals, their professional goals, and then link all this work to the things that they know they got to drive, right? Like regulatory. Regulatory work is driven through every company. Safety, right? Cost. These are all things that really interest our leaders. And the reality is maintenance and reliability, even though most of us on this panel and everybody online know that maintenance and reliability are the key enablers to regulatory and safety. We put that first. Leaders don't see it as first. They say, we're going to do safety first, and then we're going to do reliability. But we all know a reliable plant is a safe plant. We all know reliable plant is the lowest cost. So when we understand that, leaders understand that if we drive the right work, it drives all their goals for them. And there's where we got to get to from a paradigm shift. And leaders need to get there so they can say, hey, you know what? I've always been pushing the wrong work because safety is an outcome, right? Reliability is work. Maintainability is work. Availability is an outcome. And so when we can drive the right work, we can get the right outcomes. And so I think that's where we need to go. I think we've been doing this for 40 years and we've been struggling. And the reality is, I think we need a paradigm shift. We need to take those lenses, shuffle them around, and make sure we're looking through the small lens first to bring that into closer and more context, and everybody understands, and we can all work towards the right goals.
Yes. Amen. You're getting a lot of reactions from the audience, so I think your points are certainly resonating. Thank you for that, Rob. I think we could probably talk for 3 hours about this, but unfortunately, I want to save a little bit of time for questions at the end. Mark did mention at the beginning, there is a way to submit questions for the audience. So please submit your polls click on the question icon and send some questions, because we will save a few minutes at the end. But before we get to that, I'd like to have each of the panel members talk about the how. So I think we understand the challenge, and I think we understand, top floor to shop floor, what people are struggling with, how to communicate the message, how to steal Rob's analogy, tune into the radio station that those executives are listening to. So that's certainly the challenge, but the how, I'd love, each panelist to just spend 2 minutes and give us your primary takeaways on how do we actually achieve, this thread from the top to the bottom of this value chain. So, excuse me, Tom, I will start with you, and maybe you can just share a couple of points for us.
Sure. My how is fairly simple. Make friends and ask questions, or ask questions and then you ask the questions, and maybe you'll get a friendly response, maybe you won't, but normally you do. I ran for 20 years, ran a program, a master's degree in engineering management. We took in mid-career engineers, high-profile kids who wanted to become leaders, and one of our assignments was, okay, you're an engineer, you're a production line engineer or designer. You got to go talk to the CFO. And we had an assignment. I said, you put this assignment on your clipboard, and you tell the CFO that you have an assignment from the university to talk to them. These kids young men would walk into the CFO's office, and the CFO would say, hey, nobody from engineering has ever come to see me before. This is great. And the question was, so how does this all work? Well, most of the time people are happy to explain how it works. So one of my friends in a big industry, he started a long time ago. He was also on our ISO standards committee. Just walked down the hall and said to accounting, said, well, what do you got to do, and what do you need to know? And they said, well, your plant is one line on the balance sheet. I mean, maybe it would be good to understand what actually happens inside that plant that's turning out $2 billion a year. So make friends, ask questions, and just relax about it. If you ask good questions honestly and just say, hey, I want to know how things work, you'll be surprised where it leads.
Yeah, that's awesome. Make friends, ask questions. I won't forget that one. Sue, what are your top takeaways on how we communicate the message more effectively?
I like Rob's analogy around the investment, and that's very similar to the way I generally approach it, is that we start to look at what are the top level goals, what are the objectives, what are the targets we've set. These are the ones that are set internally as well as to the outside market or to the public or your various stakeholders. And I start to drop down into it. We've always spoken of it as speaking the language of the boardroom, right? And so generally that's in dollars, but it also is that commitment to sustainability, to health, safety, and the environment, to meeting our regulatory compliance. So then I start to look at what am I doing and what are my teams doing? And then I have to often connect the dots between the specific projects, initiatives, or even quite frankly, the way that we work around here and how that contributes back to meeting those overall goals and objectives. As Rob said, maintenance reliability is more of an investment in the future, but it's not instinctive for many of our senior leaders. They've gotten to where they are by following the traditional pathways, and they really don't have this broad understanding of the value that comes from asset management. And so part of our jobs is to connect the dots for them in a way that they can understand. If I'm going to put together this investment in looking at commonality in the way we do our M&R in this particular piece of equipment, this particular class of equipment, I like to think of it more, as Rob noted, in many ways, the asset management delivers the availability of the equipment from M&R, which operations uses. So M&R delivers availability, which is that capacity to produce. Up front in the life cycle, we've got our project teams, capital investment planning gives us the capacity to produce. During the operate and maintain phase of our life cycle, M&R maintains that capacity to produce. Generally, we measure it as availability, and you're right, it's an outcome. And our operations teams use that capacity to produce. This lets ops, maintenance, reliability, and our engineering teams work together to deliver our product out to our customer. Whether it's the availability of our local swimming pools, whether it's the electrical power generation, all of that. So we are working together. I keep coming back to this collaborative effort to the organization to deliver value. And so when we look at it, we need to realize this is not a 1 month or a 2 month window, right? We're investing for the long term. And those decisions that we're making on how we look after our equipment, when it's time when we have to make those decisions around run, replace, repair, all of those, and that long-term decision making is that, are we putting money into our retirement savings plan? And it's great that your financial advisor said it went up 20% last year, but they neglected to mention it dropped 50% the year before. So we need to think about what this actually means over the 20 years, 50 years of our life cycle. It is really important to keep our eye on the overall goals. My sheer SG, safety, health, environment, economics, regulatory, social, and governance. And I'm pulling forward on that with all of them, and different levers come up and down. There's nothing worse than being in an organization where everybody's goal is to send green stoplights up to management. So we've all had to do our monthly reports with the stoplights on them. If everything looks green going up, how do you know where to focus your attention? So we need to look at not only the outcomes and the results, but we also need to look at how we're getting there. So it's really easy to cut PMs to save cash this year. We're in a cash crunch and not notice the impact for, 6 months, a year, 2 years. But it would be like your home vehicle. If you don't do regular maintenance on it, how much longer have you taken off the end of the life cycle? And we're really looking for that 25, 50 year and ongoing life cycle. So I strongly believe that it's the culture and it's that coordinated efforts in the organization. Each team brings their professionalism and their expertise together to deliver that overall value. And some of our role as asset management professionals is helping to connect the dots from people who don't have that instinctive expertise within asset management. They're coming with other professional expertise.
Yes. Oh, beautiful. Beautifully stated. Thank you. All right, Rob, take it home for us. Help us, line up those telescopic lenses and connect that message all the way from the practitioner level to the top. What are your takeaways? Oh, you're on mute again.
Yeah. Thank you. It's hard to follow Tom and Sue because they've kind of covered off everything that I would have said, but here's what I'm going to add. As Tom stated, you got to be careful what you wish for. If we educate our leaders, they kind of know the difference between what good and bad is. And the reality is we've all been in a situation where our leaders say, why should I spend the money when my metrics are good? So here's where I want to go. We have to measure absolute metrics. We can't fudge the numbers. There's nothing wrong with having an ugly baby in a metric world because that tells me where my opportunities are. We continually start fudging numbers because if you tell me how you're going to measure me or tell me how I'm going to get rewarded, I'm going to tell you how I'm going to work and you're going to get that metric. There's nothing wrong with having low availability. There's nothing wrong with having failures. What is wrong is hiding them. And I can assure you from a maintainability perspective, most manufacturing facilities have the right people to fix things. The problem is we don't have the right people to find the things to fix, the right things, right? So that's the difference between maintenance and reliability. We're fixing things like crazy. We get so good at it, it looks like we're reliable. And so take those people and say, hey, instead of fixing things on the fly, let's look at the things we need to fix, the right things, and let's eliminate them. And that takes the talent. So we can't find that if we want to go forward with fake or false or misleading metrics. Well, if you ever had a business case and And we talked about that financial language with our leaders. And they're going to say, well, hold on. There's no business case here because you're telling me my availability is 95% or my reliability is 97%. If that is false, every leader in the world is going to say no to that business opportunity. And if you educate them, they're going to say, well, who's lying to me? So to add on to Tom and Sue's comments with respect to what to do, my biggest goal on top of all that good stuff is get your metrics correct, get them absolute. Let's find where all the gaps are. We have the right people to fix things. Let's start finding the right things to fix.
Great. That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank all three of you actually for your wisdom, your enlightenment on these topics. I mean, these are, big challenges on the horizon, and we all have to be thinking in this direction. So really, really appreciate that insight. I'd like to hand it over to Mark, back to Mark. And I think there are a few questions from the audience.
Yeah, we've got some questions that have accumulated here and some excellent ones, but I think we only have time for some. But I think I'll direct this first one to Tom. One of our attendees, his name is Neil. He says, honestly, do all these reporting processes credible? And I think the question really is how credible are these reporting processes? Do they actually mean something to the world and to our view as the world in asset management?
Well, I'm going to answer that two ways. The processes themselves, like the one that I mentioned in Europe, the process I think is quite credible. What's being asked for, I think, is quite credible and can be quite valuable. The response can be ridiculous. We just heard that. I mean, if it's green lights all the way to the top, and the only goal in submitting the report is to make yourself look good, there's very little way to police that. It says that the reporting requirements now require that report be audited, but we've all been through this game. I mean, I've accredited a lot of auditors, and what they actually do at the end of the day, no, it just depends on the organization, whether they take advantage of that report as a way to really gather the information. It's an excuse to gather the information, gather the knowledge and opinions that you need to look at yourself. So it just, like any, it would be like an assignment that I gave my class. If you do it well, you're going to learn something. If you can ask ChatGPT to do it for you, and you're not going to learn anything. So I hope that's what you.
Thank you, Tom. The second question that comes in, Francelay poses a really great question here, and I think I'll direct this one to Sue. Francelay asks how the asset management policy can properly support the alignment on putting in practice stakeholders' expected value. I think what behind the question is, how do you start with an asset management policy and bring in some practical supporting elements to executing what that policy requires?
I think one of the things to me on a policy is it's not about the piece of paper itself or the paragraphs that are in the policy. It's around the discussion around it. What I often find is that people all have their own vision in their mind. And as we start to put this policy together, it really starts to become the communication document. So just as we talked about, we need to integrate and align from our senior leadership to the front line, that policy document and creating it is actually the opportunity for the various people in the senior management at every level in the organization to contribute and say, you know what, this is what it means to me, and this is how my team comes together. And it really becomes that line of sight or that alignment and a way to document it. A number of companies that I've worked in or am currently working with lack that communication in terms of what's important, what are the goals and objectives. Senior management knows what their goals and objectives are, but the language isn't useful or helpful when the frontline staff are trying to make decisions on what does this actually mean day to day. And I think that our policies can really be that communication tool, and it helps bring that expected value. Rob's analogy there of the telescope, my first thought was if you're not aligned, you've got a kaleidoscope with all those broken shards of glass there.
That's
And
right.
so one of the things creating the policy can do with that alignment is to make sure we know what are our goals and targets, right? How are we going to get them? How do each of the groups contribute towards achieving those overall goals and objectives? And when people come up with wacky things off the side, you say, how does this actually fall into line and contribute? Depending on how, what do you call it? Regulatory centric your industry is, and not every industry is tightly regulated. Ones that tend to follow a lot of regulations use a policy to drive that because it almost is treated as an internal regulation. Other industries, very loose entrepreneurial, don't need the policy, but they can have the same benefits from that communication and the understanding with that common vision moving forward.
And I'll take an opportunity for a shameless plug on the ISO 55011 standard that is expected to be published in September on public policy. I think it's not just aimed at public policy. I think it would be useful instruction and guidance on setting asset management policy to achieve an enabling environment for asset management. Thanks for that answer, Sue. Appreciate it. And thank you, Francois, for the question. This next question comes pre-assigned to Rob. So Carmen asked the question, love the passion around creating pull for implementing maturing asset management for leaders. The question is, in your 30 years in the space, what's the best way to do that? And what are the catalysts / tipping points you've seen that have led to that success?
Thanks for the question, Carmen. I think the biggest issue I've seen in my career is goal setting. I represent at the corporate center, so I looked after all reliability for a very large oil and gas company. We'd finish our goals, and then we would look at our leaders' goals, and it was like, I don't know if my goals support their goals. And the reality is, the goal setting needs to start at the top and trickle down, and then that is who's doing them and why. And then from the bottom up, we work the goals on the how. And the reality is, if you're not aligning your goals to your leadership goals, they're not going to support them. Our leaders are smart, they're driven, they're passionate about the business, but at the end of the day, they're very good at delivering content or deliverables or goals that they say they're going to. And if your stuff is not aligned with their stuff, your stuff does not get done. And that's the reality. And so what we've done in the past is, we talked a little bit about it, is the education of our leaders. They need to understand a little bit about asset management. So when you bring them in your report, your metrics, your scorecard, i.e. A comparison of your current state versus what you want to be in the future state, they understand the gaps, right? So you have gaps with respect to maintenance. What is your maintenance spend and what is your budget? What is your downtime and what is your budget? And when they start seeing these things and it's linked to their goals, they will drive that from the top down and ask all the right questions. So what I've done in the past is I've prepared scorecards for the companies that I represented in a way that aligns with their goals, and then work with the leaders to build their goals to deliver on that and tie it back to the things that are important to them. Now, we all know that asset management is not regulatory, but it is implied for us that it's regulatory if we have to do it for other things. So a good pressure vessel program is regulatory for certain aspects, and we provide that with an RCM or RBI. So when the leaders understand this and they build it out from the top down. Now, got to get in early. I mean, you got to start talking about goals in January for the next year. I mean, this is how far out they are. And so when they see these gaps, and I've seen gaps as large as $1 billion per annum, And when you work down that $1 billion per annum and say, well, you've lost this much money due to downtime over and above expected. You've spent this much money more than you've expected. Here's the cost of the safety element. Here's the cost of environmental, regulatory, economic, in that aspect. So that is critical. And the tipping point is when the leadership sees that the work you're doing directly affects their bottom line, their goals, because basically leaders are climbers and they want to get to the next level. So if you can make sure that the work that you want to drives them up, you go with them, right? If it doesn't support their goals, you're not going with them for the ride. And that's the tipping point. And look for those leaders that see the value in this work and then link it so it works.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. I don't know about the panelists or the audience, but I feel a part two of this discussion and perhaps even a series over the next few months of this ongoing webinar in this particular format. I think it's been a really great way of kicking off a very important conversation. And I hope the audience isn't disappointed that this hasn't been about IoT or some sort of machine learning solution or what have you. I hope this has been a really productive kickoff to what I think should be the important conversation in 2024 and onwards. And I'm going to move through each of these slides here. Take the opportunity to use your smartphone to get a hold of Tom's coordinates here on LinkedIn. I apologize to Tom earlier. I didn't mean to make it a dinosaur and put his picture next to it. So I think that we've been friends long enough where he's already forgiven
I'm
me.
quite comfortable with the dinosaur. I like dinosaurs.
And Sue, of course, already told me that her husband is a paleontologist, and so she likes the dinosaur as well. So we got, I'm going 2 for 2 now on the dinosaur. But please take a moment to scan this QR code and join to Sue's LinkedIn network if you haven't already. And please view that video that that shows her, describes her receiving the award, that the leadership award from PEMAC. I think it really is a great testament to her expertise and capabilities, and just a great all-around person in general as well. And then finally, we have Rob here. If you really want a rigorous conversation about this, whether it be over lunch or in the boardroom or over dinner, you will never fail to have a adult conversation about these topics with Rob, one-on-one or in a group setting. Having worked with him quite a number of years ago and remain to stay in contact, he's always has something memorable for you to take home and to stick to your existing mental model. He always very capable of being sticky with his words. So I appreciate him for that. And I appreciate all 3 of these panelists for their time and joining us today. Thanks to my friend and colleague, Rachel, for doing a great job here driving the conversation and chairing this panel. Please reach out to her as well. And to me as well. We've got we've got lots to say on this subject. I'd also encourage you to not only reach out to us individually, but I invite you also to check out some of the content that we have on the IDAS Digital website. We've got some very useful blogs that capture a lot of these talking points that we've discussed today. We've got a number of white papers that are available to you as well, and not only written by our staff here at IDAS Digital, but there are some excellent access to white papers, peer-reviewed papers from the general asset management, global asset management community. And of course, we like to make short videos, and I do mean that, 2-minute to 6-minute videos that are very pithy, very condensed, but very impactful as well. And I know we didn't get through all the questions and comments, but we will capture all of this together, and we will, within a day or two, once the recording is available, we will take a lot of the resources that each of these panelists recommend this audience go to. We will put together a collection of those and send them over to your inbox Feel free to share those resources out freely once you receive them, because I think this is a conversation absolutely worth spreading. So without any further ado, I will thank our panelists again and express our appreciation. Thanks again, Rachel, for doing such a great job chairing this conversation, and thank you to the audience for joining us today and participating the way that you have. So we're looking forward to the next in what I believe is going to be a series of great conversations in this format. So thanks, everyone.